My name is Jessie, and at 61 years old, I never expected my life to take such a dramatic turn. After teaching high school for decades, winning $1.5 million in the Michigan State Lottery seemed like a blessing. I had such wonderful plans to help my family travel a bit and secure my retirement. But then I noticed my children acting strangely. The hushed phone calls, the concerned glances. I never imagined my own flesh and blood would try to declare me mentally incompetent just to get their hands on my money. Where are you watching from today? Drop a comment below, hit subscribe, and stay with me as I reveal how I fought back against my family's ultimate betrayal. I spent 35 years teaching English at Lakeside High School in our small Michigan town. It was a modest life, but one that brought me satisfaction. After my divorce from Thomas 15 years ago, I settled into a comfortable routine focusing on my work and my two adult children, Sarah and Kevin. Sarah is 38, married with two teenagers, living about 20 minutes away in a larger house than I could ever afford on my teacher's salary. Kevin is 35, divorced, working in finance in Detroit. My relationship with Thomas had been strained even before the divorce. He resented my dedication to my students, and when the kids were grown, we realized we had little left in common. The split was relatively amicable, though we rarely spoke afterward, except at major family events. My life was simple. I lived in the same 3-bedroom ranch house I had owned for 20 years, drove a 10-year-old Honda, and my biggest luxury was dinner with friends every Thursday at the local Italian restaurant. I had a small garden in the backyard where I grew tomatoes and herbs during summer break, and I volunteered at the community library twice a month. One of my little traditions was buying a lottery ticket every Friday, just one ticket, $5 a week for over 20 years. It was my small indulgence, my little dream. I never really expected to win. It was just fun to imagine what I might do with the money while I graded papers on Friday evenings. That fateful Friday in April started like any other. I stopped at Marshall's convenience store on my way home from school, bought my usual ticket, and tucked it into my wallet without a second thought. I spent the weekend cleaning the house and preparing lesson plans for the following week. It was Sunday evening when I remembered to check the numbers. I was making a cup of tea watching the local news when they announced the winning numbers. I pulled out my ticket and casually glanced at it, expecting nothing, as usual. But this time, the numbers matched. All of them. I checked 3 times my hands, shaking so badly I could barely hold the ticket. "This can't be right," I whispered to myself in my empty kitchen. I immediately called the lottery information line and entered my numbers. The automated voice confirmed I had a winning ticket worth $1.5 million. I sat down hard on my kitchen chair, heart pounding. I was a millionaire. After taxes, I would clear just under $1 million, more money than I had ever imagined having. My first call was to Marla, my best friend since college. She screamed so loudly I had to hold the phone away from my ear. "Jessie, oh my God, what are you going to do? You have to quit that job right now." I laughed, still in shock. I only have 2 more years until full retirement benefits, but maybe I could take a leave of absence next year. After talking with Marla for an hour, I called my children. Sarah answered on the first ring. "Mom, everything okay? You never call this late." "Everything is wonderful, sweetie. I won the lottery." There was a pause. "Very funny, Mom." "No, I really did. The Michigan State Lottery, $1.5 million. I heard her gasp, then call out to her husband, "Mom won the lottery." There was muffled talking. Then Sarah came back on the line, her voice pitched higher with excitement. "Mom, this is incredible. Are you sure? Did you double-check the numbers?" "Triple-checked. I can hardly believe it myself." Kevin was equally shocked when I called him next. He immediately started talking about investment strategies and tax implications. That was Kevin always thinking about the practical aspects. "Mom, you need a good financial advisor right away," I know someone perfect for this situation." I was touched by his concern. "That would be wonderful, honey. I have no idea what to do with this kind of money." Over the next few days, both of my children called frequently. Kevin drove in from Detroit to have lunch with me, something that rarely happened before. Sarah invited me to dinner 3 times that week. Their sudden attention was nice, if a bit overwhelming. I had simple plans for the money. I wanted to set up college funds for my grandchildren, fix the roof, and update my kitchen, maybe take a trip to Europe that I had always dreamed about. Nothing extravagant. I still intended to live in my house and keep most of my same routines. The money would provide security, not a complete lifestyle change. I had to decide whether to take the lump sum payment or the annuity option. The lump sum would be significantly less, but I would have access to all the money immediately. After discussing it with Kevin and his recommended financial advisor, Lawrence Peterson, I decided on the lump sum. At my age, it made more sense. Lawrence seemed competent, though somewhat deferential to Kevin during our meeting. He laid out several investment options, but was quick to defer to my son when I asked questions. "Your son has a good head for finance, Mrs. Carter," Lawrence said. "You should consider yourself lucky to have him looking out for your interests." The first real red flag came during a conversation with Sarah about a month after my win. We were having coffee in my kitchen when she casually mentioned her concerns. "Mom, have you thought about security? I mean, everyone knows you won that money. This house is not exactly Fort Knox." I looked around my comfortable, familiar home. "I installed a new alarm system last week. The Lottery Commission advised it." Sarah frowned, stirring her coffee. "That might not be enough. You know you could always move in with us. We have that guest room that never gets used, and the kids would love having you around more." Something in her tone made me uneasy. "That's sweet, honey, but I love my home. I have no intention of leaving." "Well, at least think about it," she insisted. "We worry about you here all alone with all that money." As I walked her to the door later, I noticed her studying my home with a calculating expression that I had never seen on my daughter's face before. It sent a small chill through me that I tried to dismiss as paranoia. After all, this was Sarah, the little girl I had raised, who had cried on my shoulder through her first heartbreak and called me for advice when her own children were born. But as I closed the door behind her, I couldn't shake the feeling that something fundamental had changed in our relationship. I just didn't realize yet how right I was, or how far my family would go to get their hands on my lottery winnings. The first clear sign that something was wrong came about 6 weeks after my lottery win. Sarah and Kevin had invited me to Sunday dinner at Sarah's house, something that had become a weekly occurrence since I won the money. But this dinner felt different from the moment I arrived. "Mom, we need to talk about something," Sarah said as we sat in the living room before dinner. Kevin was seated next to her, looking unusually serious. Her husband, Greg, hovered nearby, avoiding eye contact with me. "You have been forgetting things lately," Kevin said gently. "We are concerned." I was genuinely confused. "Forgetting things like what?" "Last week you forgot our dinner plans," Sarah said. "We waited for an hour." "What?" "No, we agreed on 7 o'clock. I have it written in my calendar. I was there at 7, exactly." "Mom," Sarah said, sharing a look with Kevin that made my stomach tighten. "We clearly said 6. We all heard it. This is exactly what we mean." I started to argue but stopped. Had I misheard, I was certain we had agreed on 7, but now doubt crept in. "And you forgot my birthday last month," Kevin added. That I knew was false. "Kevin, I called you first thing in the morning on your birthday and mailed your gift a week early. You thanked me for the watch." He shook his head sadly. "You called a day late, Mom. I just didn't want to make you feel bad about it." I felt disoriented, as though the ground beneath me was shifting. I knew with absolute certainty that I had called on his birthday, April 23rd. I had marked it on my calendar with a red pen, as I did every important date. The conversation continued with more examples of supposed memory lapses, each one either completely fabricated or grossly exaggerated. A missed appointment that had actually been rescheduled by the doctor's office. A bill I had allegedly forgotten to pay that I had the receipt for. Names of neighbors I supposedly couldn't remember, but had known for years. 2 days later, I overheard a conversation that confirmed my growing suspicions. I had stopped by Kevin's apartment to drop off some homemade cookies, using my key to let myself in when he didn't answer the door. I was about to call out when I heard him in the bedroom speaking on the phone. "Dad, just listen. She has the money now, but if we can prove she's not competent to manage it, we can set up a conservatorship. Sarah found a lawyer who specializes in this. No, she's not actually crazy, but we can make it look that way. Small things at first, moving her stuff, changing appointments. Yes, eventually custody of her finances. Of course, I will cut you in. Just stick to the plan." I froze my hand over my mouth to stifle my shock. My own son was plotting with my ex-husband to declare me mentally incompetent to steal my lottery winnings. I slipped out silently, my mind racing. The next day, Kevin called with a suggestion. "Mom, I was thinking, my friend Jason is a financial manager. Maybe we should let him oversee your money, just to keep everything organized." "I thought that was what Lawrence was doing," I said carefully. "Well, yes, but Jason specializes in family wealth management. He could set up a structure where all of us have input." I made a non-committal response, but inside I was seething. All of us have input on my money. Then came the papers. Sarah brought them over one evening, presenting them as just some forms to update your will and create a family trust. "The lawyer said these are standard procedures for someone in your new financial situation," she explained, pointing to where I should sign. I pretended to read them, but knew I would not sign anything without having my own lawyer review it first. "Let me take some time with these," I said. Sarah frowned. "The lawyer really needs them back tomorrow. It's just routine, Mom." "Then another day won't matter," I insisted, putting the papers aside. After she left, I looked more carefully at what she had tried to get me to sign. They weren't just updates to my will. They were documents granting Sarah and Kevin partial control over my assets in the event of mental incapacity, with very loose definitions of what constituted incapacity. The incidents escalated. Greg, Sarah's husband, started coming by unannounced to check on me. "Sarah just wanted me to make sure you're doing okay," he would say, his eyes scanning my house as though looking for evidence of something. I started noticing small things missing or moved in my home. My reading glasses that always sat on my bedside table would be on the kitchen counter. Important mail disappeared only to have Sarah mention, "I noticed you forgot to pay your property tax bill," days later. My medication seemed different too. I had taken the same blood pressure pill for years, a small white tablet. One day, I noticed they looked slightly larger. Had the pharmacy changed manufacturers? Or had someone tampered with my medicine? My grandchildren started asking strange questions during visits. "Grandma, do you know what day it is?" 13-year-old Lily would ask, as though testing me. "Mom says you get confused sometimes," 16-year-old Jacob said during one visit. "But you seem fine to me." I began receiving calls from concerned friends, all of whom mentioned that Sarah or Kevin had suggested they check on me. My sister-in-law called from Arizona, something she rarely did. "Kevin mentioned you have been having some memory issues, Jessie. Should we be worried?" The bank called about unusual inquiries into my accounts. Someone had been asking questions about my balance and withdrawal limits, claiming to be an authorized family member. Distant cousins I hadn't heard from in years suddenly visited, their eyes taking inventory of my possessions. My nephew asked pointed questions about my estate planning. It was after one of these visits that Sarah made her most direct move yet. "Mom, I think you should consider getting a psychological evaluation," she said, trying to keep her voice casual as we washed dishes together after dinner at her house. "Just to set a baseline, you know. Now that you have substantial assets, it would be good to have documentation of your mental state." Why would I need that? I asked, keeping my voice level despite my racing heart. Just for legal protection. For the future. I nodded as though considering it, but inside I was connecting all the dots. The final confirmation came when Sarah went to the bathroom, leaving her purse on the kitchen counter. I knew I shouldn't look, but I had to know for sure. Inside was a printout of an article titled, "How to Establish Legal Guardianship for an Elderly Parent." I was 61, hardly elderly, and in perfect health. There was also a business card for a lawyer specializing in conservatorship cases. As I drove home that night, I felt a cold determination replace my hurt and shock. My own children were trying to steal my money by declaring me mentally incompetent. They had involved my ex-husband, other relatives, and even my grandchildren in their scheme. They had no idea who they were dealing with. I might be their mother, but I was about to show them that this former English teacher was nobody's fool. That night, I started a journal documenting every strange incident, every manipulative conversation, every convenient memory my children claimed I had forgotten. I wrote down dates, times, and exact quotes. I hid this journal inside a hollowed-out copy of Pride and Prejudice on my bookshelf, knowing my literary children would never think to look in a book they had refused to read, despite my recommendations. Next, I ordered a small security camera online and had it shipped to Marla's house rather than my own. It looked like a normal digital clock and sat unobtrusively on my living room bookshelf. It activated by motion and recorded both video and audio. I installed a second hidden camera in my kitchen. Within days, I had evidence. Sarah using her key to enter my home while I was at a doctor's appointment searching through my desk drawers. Kevin examining the statements from my new investment accounts that I had left visible taking photos with his phone. Both of them discussing where I might keep important documents while they thought I was napping in the bedroom. "She has to have the lottery paperwork somewhere," Kevin whispered on the recording. "And her bank statements. We need to show a pattern of confusion or poor decisions." "I already told all the neighbors to call me if they see her doing anything unusual," Sarah replied, "and I spoke with her doctor about our concerns." That revelation infuriated me. My doctor of 15 years, speaking with my daughter about my medical information, without my consent. I also began recording phone conversations with my children using an app on my phone that Marla's teenage grandson had helped me install. It captured every conversation automatically. The evidence continued to mount. While visiting Sarah, I accidentally left open the family laptop that everyone used. When I returned, I noticed someone had searched "how to declare someone mentally incompetent" and accessing parents' money legally. The browser history showed extensive research on guardianship laws in Michigan. I discovered that Sarah had been telling neighbors I was slipping mentally. Mrs. Johnson next door awkwardly mentioned it during our weekly garden chat. "Sarah seems very concerned about your memory, dear," she said hesitantly. "She asked us all to keep an eye on you and report anything unusual." I told her you seem perfectly fine to me, sharper than most people half your age. I thanked her for her honesty, adding another item to my growing documentation. Kevin's research was even more disturbing. On his tablet, which he had asked me to check for an email while he was in the bathroom, I found bookmarked articles about legal guardianship and mental incompetence. One article specifically outlined how family members could gain control over a relative's finances if they could prove the person was unable to make sound financial decisions. Then came the most unexpected twist. Thomas, my ex-husband, called me out of the blue. "Jessie, I've been thinking about you a lot lately," he said, his voice carrying that charming tone I remembered from our early dating days. "Life is short, and maybe we were too hasty ending things. Would you like to have dinner sometime for old times' sake?" Thomas, who had remarried and divorced again since our split, who had barely acknowledged me at our children's events, was suddenly interested in reconciliation. Right after I won the lottery, the transparency of their scheme was almost insulting. I agreed to dinner, curious to see how far he would go. We met at a restaurant where Thomas was overly solicitous, repeatedly mentioning how youthful I looked, asking leading questions about my future plans for the money. I pretended mild confusion a few times, watching as he exchanged glances with our server, clearly trying to establish witnesses to my supposed mental decline. "You know, Jessie," he said, reaching for my hand across the table. "I worry about you living alone with your memory issues. Our children mentioned you've been forgetting important things." "Did they?" I replied innocently. "How strange. My doctor just gave me a clean bill of health, including a cognitive assessment. Perfect score." Thomas faltered briefly but recovered. "Well, sometimes these things come and go. Good days and bad days, you know." I smiled and changed the subject, but made note of every manipulation attempt in my journal later that night. The situation reached a breaking point when my family staged what they called an intervention at Sarah's house. I arrived for what I thought was a regular Sunday dinner to find Kevin Sarah Thomas, my brother Mike, who had flown in from Florida, and a man introduced as Andrew, a family counselor. "Mom, we need to talk about something important," Sarah said, guiding me to a chair positioned to face everyone. They had arranged themselves in a semicircle, like a tribunal. "We're concerned about your mental state," Kevin said, his face arranged in an expression of exaggerated concern. "We've all noticed significant changes in your behavior since you won the money." One by one, they listed invented examples of my supposed mental decline. Appointments I had never made but supposedly missed, conversations I allegedly couldn't remember, money I had supposedly misplaced or spent frivolously, paranoid statements I had never uttered. My brother Mike, who had always been easily influenced by stronger personalities, nodded along. "Jessie, when we spoke on the phone last month, you seemed confused about what year it was." That was an outright lie. We had discussed his upcoming retirement in 2026, and I had made a joke about how we were getting old. "We love you, Mom." Sarah said, tears in her eyes that I now recognized as completely manufactured. "We just want to protect you." "And your money," I thought, but didn't say. Andrew, the family counselor, turned out to be Kevin's friend, who was actually an attorney specializing in guardianship cases. He produced papers for temporary financial oversight that would give Sarah and Kevin control over my lottery winnings until a complete psychological evaluation could be performed. I felt a wave of emotions devastation that my own children would betray me, like this rage at their manipulation, and fear that they might somehow succeed. But I maintained my composure, pretending to be overwhelmed and confused by their concerns. "I don't understand," I said, allowing my voice to tremble. "I feel fine. Why are you all saying these things?" "It's okay, Mom," Kevin said, sharing a triumphant glance with Sarah. "We're going to take care of everything. You don't need to worry anymore." I left the intervention in tears, which they clearly interpreted as a sign that their plan was working. As I drove away, I could almost feel their satisfaction, thinking they had broken me. They had no idea that my tears were not of defeat, but of determination and righteous anger. They had declared war on the wrong woman. The morning after the intervention, I called Marla. She had been my rock through this entire ordeal, listening to my recordings, helping me document the evidence, and providing emotional support when I felt overwhelmed by my family's betrayal. "They've made their move," I told her. "They tried to get me to sign guardianship papers last night." "Those snakes," Marla hissed. "What's your next step?" "I need a good lawyer, someone who specializes in elder law and has experience with these kinds of cases." "My son Frank is an attorney," Marla said. "He doesn't practice elder law, but he knows everyone in the legal community. Let me call him." By that afternoon, I was sitting in the office of Frank Williams, an attorney specializing in elder law and financial abuse cases. His office was warm and inviting, with comfortable chairs and soft lighting that put me at ease immediately. I laid out the entire situation, showing him my journal of documented incidents, the video recordings of my children searching my house, and the audio recordings of their conversations about having me declared incompetent. Frank's expression grew increasingly grave as he reviewed my evidence. Mrs. Carter, I have to say, in my 15 years of practicing elder law, I've rarely seen such a well-documented case of attempted financial exploitation. Most people don't realize what's happening until it's too late. I'm an English teacher, I said with a small smile. I pay attention to details and inconsistencies in stories. Their narrative had too many plot holes. Frank laughed, then turned serious again. They've made some critical mistakes. For one, you're not elderly by legal standards. At 61, you're barely at retirement age. For another, they've left a clear electronic trail of their research into guardianship and accessing your money. But most importantly, you've documented everything. We developed a strategic plan. First, I would get an independent psychological evaluation from a respected neurologist, unconnected to my regular doctor, who I now suspected had been compromised by my children's concerns. We need to establish without a doubt that you're mentally competent, Frank explained. That's the cornerstone of their attack, so it needs to be our strongest defense. While waiting for my appointment with the neurologist, I continued gathering evidence. I reconnected with Lisa, a former student who now worked at my bank. I had taught her advanced placement English 15 years earlier and had written her recommendation letter for college. Mrs. Carter, I've been meaning to call you, she said when I visited the bank. There have been some unusual inquiries about your accounts recently. A woman claiming to be your daughter has called several times asking about your balance and transaction history. I refuse to provide any information, of course, since she's not on your accounts, but she was quite persistent. Thank you, Lisa, I said, genuinely grateful for her professionalism. Would you be willing to provide a written statement about these attempts to access my account information? Absolutely, she replied without hesitation. I can document all the calls and attempts. The psychological evaluation came back exactly as I expected. Mrs. Carter shows above-average cognitive function for her age group, the neurologist wrote. There is no indication of any memory impairment, cognitive decline, or decision-making deficits. In fact, her problem-solving abilities and recall are exceptional. I had Frank make multiple certified copies of this report, knowing it would be our most powerful weapon. My next step was to meet with my regular doctor to understand what Sarah had told him. I scheduled an appointment, bringing Frank with me as my advocate. Dr. Bennett, I understand my daughter has spoken to you about concerns regarding my mental health, I said directly once we were in his office. He looked uncomfortable. I'm not at liberty to discuss conversations with family members, Mrs. Carter. Actually, Frank interjected smoothly, Mrs. Carter has the right to know what medical concerns have been raised about her, especially when they may be part of a documented attempt to gain control of her assets. Dr. Bennett paled slightly. Sarah expressed some concerns about memory issues, but I assured her that I had seen no evidence of cognitive decline during your regular checkups. Did you share any of my medical information with her? I asked. Of course not, he said quickly. That would violate HIPAA regulations. Would you be willing to provide a statement confirming my good health and cognitive function based on your 15 years as my physician? I asked. He agreed readily, perhaps eager to distance himself from my family's scheme. With medical evidence secured, I turned to building a support network of witnesses. I met with neighbors who could testify to my normal behavior and sound mind. I reconnected with former colleagues from the high school who were shocked at the allegations my children were making. My grandson, Jacob Sarah's 16-year-old son, became an unexpected ally. He called me privately one afternoon. "Grandma, I need to tell you something," he said, his voice low. "Mom and Dad have been talking about your money a lot. They're planning to buy a vacation house in Florida once they get control of your finances. And they told me not to tell you about the meetings they've been having with some lawyer." "Thank you for telling me, Jacob," I said, moved by his honesty. "You're doing the right thing." "They're wrong about you, Grandma," he said fiercely. "You're the smartest person I know." I created a detailed timeline of my family's escalating behavior, from the first suggestion that I move in with Sarah for safety to the full-blown intervention. Frank reviewed everything, helping me organize the evidence for maximum impact. Then came the moment I had been preparing for. I received formal legal notice that my children had filed an emergency petition for temporary guardianship, claiming I was suffering from sudden onset dementia and was delusional about family members trying to steal her money. The irony would have been amusing if it weren't so heartbreaking. The hearing was scheduled for the following week. I was ready to fight for my autonomy, my dignity, and my financial independence. My children had no idea what was coming. The day of the guardianship hearing arrived with a surreal quality. I dressed carefully in a conservative navy blue dress and pearl earrings, the picture of a dignified together woman. Frank met me at the courthouse steps, briefcase bulging with our evidence. "Remember, stay calm no matter what they say," he advised as we walked in. "Let them dig their own hole with exaggerations and lies. We have facts on our side." The courtroom was smaller than I expected, with dark wood paneling and fluorescent lighting that gave everything a slightly harsh glow. Sarah and Kevin were already seated at one table with their attorney, a sharp-looking woman in an expensive suit. Thomas sat behind them along with my brother Mike. They all stared as I walked in. I saw shock register on their faces at my appearance, composed and professional, a stark contrast to the confused, emotional wreck they had expected. Judge Eleanor Martinez presided, a stern-looking woman in her 60s with silver-streaked black hair and reading glasses perched on her nose. She reviewed the petition briefly before looking up. "This is a hearing for temporary guardianship of Jessie Carter, aged 61, filed by her children Sarah Lawson and Kevin Carter. Let's begin with the petitioners." The children's attorney, Ms. Winters, presented their case first. According to their filing, I had exhibited alarming mental deterioration since winning the lottery. She outlined a series of incidents, most completely fabricated or grossly distorted missed appointments that never existed, confused conversations that never happened, paranoid accusations I had never made. "Mrs. Carter's condition has rapidly declined over the past 3 months," Ms. Winters stated confidently. "She frequently forgets important events, loses track of conversations mid-sentence, and has become increasingly paranoid, accusing family members of stealing from her or plotting against her." I kept my face neutral, though. Inside, I was seething at the blatant lies. Frank patted my hand reassuringly under the table. Sarah testified next, tears welling in her eyes as she described her concerns about my well-being. "Mom has always been so sharp, so on top of things," she said, dabbing at her eyes with a tissue. "But since the lottery win, she's different. Last month she called me in the middle of the night, confused about where she was in her own house. When I arrived, she accused me of moving her furniture to confuse her." None of that had happened. Not a single word of it was true. Kevin followed with similar fabrications, including a story about finding me wandering the neighborhood in my robe, disoriented. Thomas testified about our dinner, claiming I couldn't remember how many children we had and had become agitated when he tried to help me with the menu. The judge listened impassively, occasionally glancing at me as if assessing whether I matched the portrait they were painting. I could see skepticism in her eyes, which gave me hope. When my brother Mike testified that I had seemed confused and forgetful during our recent phone conversations, I felt a genuine pang of hurt. Mike and I had always been close. That he would lie about me for whatever cut of the money they had promised him was a betrayal I hadn't fully prepared for. Throughout their testimony, Frank took detailed notes, but raised few objections, letting them create a record of their false statements that we could then systematically dismantle. When it was our turn, Frank started with a simple question to me. "Mrs. Carter, what do you believe is happening here today?" "My children are attempting to gain control of my lottery winnings by having me declared mentally incompetent," I said clearly. "They have fabricated evidence, manipulated situations, and outright lied to create the appearance of cognitive decline." The judge leaned forward slightly. "That's a serious accusation, Mrs. Carter." "Yes, Your Honor, and I have serious evidence to support it." Frank methodically presented our case. First came the independent neurological evaluation showing my excellent cognitive function. Then my regular doctor's statement confirming no signs of mental decline over 15 years of treatment. Now, Your Honor, I would like to present evidence that the petitioners have engaged in a coordinated effort to create the appearance of mental incompetence for financial gain. He played the video recordings of Sarah and Kevin searching my house when they thought I wasn't home, their conversation clearly audible. "She has to have the lottery paperwork somewhere, and her bank statements. We need to show a pattern of confusion or poor decisions." Sarah gasped audibly. Kevin's face drained of color. Frank played more recordings, phone conversations, where they discussed strategies for having me declared incompetent. Kevin's call with Thomas, planning how they would divide my money once they gained control. Sarah coaching her husband on what to say to the family counselor about my supposed symptoms. Lisa from the bank testified about Sarah's attempts to access my account information. Neighbors testified that they had observed no unusual behavior from me, but had been repeatedly approached by Sarah with concerns about my mental state. The most damaging evidence came from my grandson Jacob, who had asked to testify despite his mother's fury. At 16, he needed the judge's special permission, which she granted after a brief interview in chambers. "Grandma is fine," he stated firmly. "My parents started talking about her money right after she won. They made plans for what they would do with it, like buying a vacation house in Florida and a new car for Dad. They told me and my sister to ask Grandma weird questions to test her and to tell them if she seemed confused about anything." By the time Jacob had finished, Sarah was openly crying no longer, the controlled tears of her earlier performance, but the messy sobs of someone watching their plans collapse. Frank then presented the documented timeline of manipulation attempts, from the subtle suggestions that I move in with Sarah to the full intervention with the fake counselor. Ms. Winters attempted damage control, arguing that my recordings were an invasion of privacy and should be inadmissible. The judge overruled her. In cases of alleged elder exploitation, evidence of the alleged victim's mental capacity and the petitioner's intent is relevant and admissible, Judge Martinez stated firmly. During the final phase of the hearing, my children's attorney tried a new approach, claiming they had acted out of genuine concern, misguided perhaps, but with good intentions. "Your Honor, the petitioners may have overreacted to normal aging signs, but they sincerely believed their mother needed protection. Their methods were perhaps overzealous, but their concern was real." Frank was ready for this. "Your Honor, if they were genuinely concerned about Mrs. Carter's well-being, why do we have multiple recorded conversations about accessing her money? Why the extensive research on guardianship law before any alleged symptoms appeared? Why the coordinated efforts to create the appearance of confusion? This was not concern. This was conspiracy." The judge called a brief recess to review all the evidence. When she returned, her expression was stern. "I have rarely seen such a clear-cut case in my courtroom," she began. "The petition for guardianship is not only denied, it is dismissed with prejudice. The evidence overwhelmingly demonstrates that Mrs. Carter is mentally competent and has been the target of a coordinated effort to gain control of her lottery winnings through fraudulent claims of mental incapacity." She looked directly at Sarah and Kevin. I am referring this case to the district attorney's office for potential criminal charges of attempted financial exploitation. You should retain criminal defense counsel immediately." I felt a complex wave of emotions wash over me. Vindication and relief, certainly, but also profound sadness that it had come to this. As Judge Martinez concluded the hearing, I looked at my children's faces. The shock and fear I saw there brought me no satisfaction, only a deep sense of loss. The days following the court hearing were eerily quiet. No calls from Sarah or Kevin. No surprise visits. Thomas disappeared back to wherever he had been before the scent of money drew him out. My brother Mike left a tearful voicemail apology that I wasn't yet ready to return. A week after the hearing, Sarah texted asking if we could talk. I agreed to meet at a neutral location, a coffee shop downtown. Kevin joined her, both looking subdued and nervous as I approached their table. "Mom," Sarah began, her voice shaky, "we don't know what to say." "The truth would be a start," I replied, keeping my voice level. "We never meant for things to go so far," Kevin said. "It started small, just talks about helping you manage the money, making sure you were protected." "Protected from what?" I asked. "Myself, I managed just fine for 61 years before the lottery." Sarah looked down at her untouched coffee. "We were worried about people taking advantage of you." "While planning to do exactly that yourselves," I noted. The irony was not lost on me. They took turns offering explanations and partial admissions, never fully owning the depth of their betrayal. Sarah blamed financial pressure from her husband's business losses. Kevin cited his own divorce settlement that had left him financially strained. They spoke of feeling entitled to the money as family, of convincing themselves that I would make poor financial decisions, of justifying their actions as ultimately protective. "We love you, Mom," Sarah said, tears streaming down her face. "We got lost somehow. The money just changed everything." "Money doesn't change people," I said quietly. "It reveals who they already are." That statement hung in the air between us, heavy with truth. Later that week, Thomas called asking to see me. We met at the same restaurant where he had tried to charm me after my lottery win. His approach was different this time, more direct. "Jessie, I was wrong. I let greed cloud my judgment," he admitted. "Kevin approached me with the plan and I went along with it. I should have told him it was wrong and refused to participate." "Yes, you should have," I agreed. "Instead, you tried to manipulate me after 15 years of barely acknowledging my existence." His excuses were pathetic, revolving around his own financial difficulties and a misguided sense that he deserved some of my good fortune after our years together, conveniently forgetting that our divorce settlement had been more than fair. The hardest decisions were what to do about my relationships with each family member going forward. After much reflection and several sessions with a therapist, I developed a plan. For Sarah and Kevin, I established clear boundaries. We would maintain contact, but trust would have to be rebuilt gradually, if ever. They would have no access to my home without explicit invitation. All discussions of money were off the table indefinitely. "I am willing to work on our relationship," I told them during a carefully controlled meeting at my therapist's office. "But it will never be the same. You need to understand that." My relationship with my grandchildren required delicate handling. I met with each of them individually, explaining in age-appropriate ways what had happened without demonizing their parents. "Your mom and dad made some bad choices," I told 13-year-old Lily. "But that doesn't mean they don't love you, and it certainly doesn't change how much I love you." Jacob, at 16, understood more. "I knew what they were doing was wrong," he said. "That's why I testified." "You showed tremendous courage and integrity," I told him, hugging him tightly. "I will never forget that." I declined to press criminal charges against my children, despite the judge's referral to the district attorney. The public humiliation of the court hearing and the knowledge that I had all the evidence recorded seemed punishment enough. Plus, I couldn't bear the thought of my grandchildren seeing their parents prosecuted, regardless of how justified it might be. With my brother Mike, reconciliation came more easily. He had been a follower all his life, easily influenced by stronger personalities. His tearful apology seemed genuine, and he had played a more peripheral role in the scheme. "I should have known better," he said when we finally spoke. "I let Kevin convince me you were having problems. I never should have doubted you." I restructured my finances with trustworthy advisors recommended by Frank, not by my family. I created a revocable trust with ironclad provisions against exploitation. I changed my will, reducing my children's inheritances significantly and establishing direct trusts for my grandchildren that neither Sarah nor Kevin could access. Practically speaking, I took numerous steps to protect myself. I changed the locks on my house and installed a comprehensive security system. I set up new accounts at a different bank where Lisa had moved to a management position. I updated all my passwords and created a secure system for managing my digital life. The Lottery Commission had warned me that winning would change my relationships. I had naively assumed they meant friends might ask for loans, or distant relatives might suddenly appear. I never imagined my own children would attempt something so calculating and cruel. As painful as the experience was, it forced me to establish boundaries I should have set long ago. For the first time in my adult life, I was putting my own well-being first, without guilt or apology. There was an unexpected freedom in that, a silver lining to the dark cloud of betrayal. In the year following the court hearing, I embarked on what I came to think of as my healing journey. Initially, the pain of betrayal was almost physical, a constant ache that woke me in the night and shadowed my days. Trust. I discovered once shattered leaves, razor-sharp fragments that cut deeply with every memory. I found a wonderful therapist, Dr. Eleanor Reed, who specialized in family trauma and betrayal. Our weekly sessions became an anchor in the turbulent sea of my emotions. "What your family did was about them, not you," she reminded me often. "Their actions revealed their character, not your worth." Gradually, I began rebuilding my life. I used some of my lottery winnings exactly as I had originally planned. I fixed my roof and renovated my kitchen, turning it into the sunny open space I had always wanted. I established college funds for my grandchildren with strict provisions that only they could access the money once they reached college age. I took that dream trip to Europe, spending 2 months exploring Italy, France, and England with Marla. We visited the places I had taught about for decades, standing in awe before the art and architecture I had previously only seen in textbooks. In Paris, I found myself weeping at the beauty of Notre Dame, overwhelmed by the realization that I was finally there, finally living, instead of just teaching about living. Upon my return, I discovered new purpose through volunteering. I started teaching financial literacy classes at the senior center, helping other older adults protect themselves from exploitation. My own experience became a powerful cautionary tale that resonated with my students. "If it can happen to me with my own children, it can happen to anyone," I would tell them. "Knowledge and documentation are your best protection." I also began speaking to law enforcement groups about financial exploitation, helping officers understand the subtle signs and psychological impact of these crimes. Frank often joined me for these presentations, providing the legal perspective while I offered the victim's experience. New friendships blossomed during this time. I reconnected with former students who had become successful adults, many with children of their own. These relationships brought me great joy, free from the complications of my family dynamics. I joined a book club and a walking group, surrounding myself with intelligent, active people who knew nothing of my lottery win or family drama. My relationship with my remaining family evolved slowly. Sarah and Kevin maintained cautious contact, though our interactions remained formal and limited. The district attorney had ultimately decided not to pursue charges, partly due to my reluctance, but the threat had sobered them considerably. For the grandchildren, I remained a steady presence. I attended their school events, celebrated their achievements, and created new traditions with them that didn't involve their parents. Jacob especially sought out my company, often stopping by after school to talk about books or college plans. These relationships became my most cherished family connections. The money itself I managed conservatively. I continued living in my modest home, driving the same car, maintaining most of my pre-lottery habits. I donated to educational causes, established a small scholarship at my former high school, and funded a reading program at the local library. These purposeful uses of the money brought me more satisfaction than any luxury purchase could have. Trust returned gradually, selectively. I learned to listen to my instincts, to pay attention to actions rather than words, to require consistency over time before extending faith. I no longer felt obligated to trust someone simply because of a blood connection or shared history. Forgiveness proved more complicated. I could forgive the hurt caused to me more easily than the corruption of my grandchildren, who had been instructed to spy on me, to test me to participate in the family's scheme. That violation of innocence seemed harder to pardon. Yet I worked toward forgiveness, not for my children's benefit, but for my own peace of mind. As months passed, I found myself increasingly at peace with what had happened. The betrayal had stripped away illusions about family obligations and revealed the true nature of my relationships. There was clarity in that painful, but useful. I realized that the lottery money, rather than being a curse as I sometimes felt in my darkest moments, had actually saved me from potential exploitation later in life, when I might have been more vulnerable. Had my children harbored these tendencies all along, waiting for old age to make me an easier target? The thought was chilling, but forced me to acknowledge that perhaps the timing had been a blessing in disguise. By the 1-year anniversary of the court hearing, I had established a new normal. My home felt like a sanctuary again, my daily routine comfortable and purposeful. I had traveled, contributed to causes I believed in, secured my grandchildren's educational futures, and found new ways to use my teaching skills. Most importantly, I had reclaimed my sense of self-determination. No one was gaslighting me, manipulating me, or trying to control my decisions. I answered to no one but myself in matters large and small. There was profound freedom in that independence, a silver lining to the dark cloud of betrayal. The experience had taught me that wealth does not create character flaws. It simply creates opportunities for existing flaws to express themselves. It had taught me that family ties, while important, do not justify exploitation or abuse. And it had taught me that even at 61, it was not too late to set boundaries, to stand up for myself, to begin again. As I look forward to my future, I do so with hard-won wisdom and unexpected optimism. My family tried to prove I was crazy to steal my money. Instead, they taught me just how sane, strong, and resilient I truly am. Have you ever had to stand up against family members who tried to take advantage of you? I would love to hear your stories in the comments below. And if this story resonated with you, please like, subscribe, and share it with someone who might need to hear that it's never too late to stand up for yourself. Thank you for listening to my journey, and remember that sometimes the greatest strength comes after our most painful betrayals.